All right, so you're looking at the front of the Overdrive. Here's the springs that will go ahead and help compress the sun gear and everything when the pump is actuated. So we're going to take those out and get those into some degreaser. And then we're going to pop, if you remember in that first video, I took the big, huge springs that were over here for the accumulator. There's a little valve up here. Take that valve apart and you put compressed air into it, and hopefully the thing will pop out. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll get these springs out real quick, no problem. Dump them in the degreaser, which I'm warming up in my crock pot, and then get this, see if I can get this valve out. All right, another thing that's getting my way is this mount here. In my research, this mount is not for the Triumph TR4. I don't think it's for the TR6 either. If you guys know what this mount is for, let me know. I'm not going to destroy it, but I want to get it off. So even though it's a broken flange here, I can't spread that wide enough to clear the Overdrive. And I also got this nut back here, which I'm eventually going to want to get out anyway. So I'm going to just go ahead, pull that nut off. It's got a cotter pin in there. Get that apart. And then get this stupid motor, the transmission mount out of here. All right, that is a 1 1/4 inch nut there. No idea how tight it is. I didn't look up the spec. Not too tight. Looks in halfway decent shape. Big old Castle nut. These things are not cheap to replace if you mess them up. So something to be aware of. I think the one for the differential was like 20 bucks. All right, there's a washer in here, and I'm gonna go get a puller, and we'll pull this out because it's not coming out too easily. Got that guy off a little, actually a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be, but everything looks all right. The collar or the seal area is not pitted or anything like that, so that's good. And looking inside of that bearing in there, this thing turns nice and smooth. So I don't think I'm going to have to worry about anything falling apart, unlike poor Steve, who had these bearings in his transmission completely falling apart. Next up is getting that piston out like I had promised. So there's a little hole right here, or a bolt right here. We're going to pull that bolt out, and then hopefully upon doing that, there will be the valve in there and a little ball. I'm going to have to use a magnet. I'll actually obviously zoom in for you so you can see what I'm doing, and we'll figure out what's in there. So here's all your pieces, parts here. So this goes down and into the gearbox, or into the Overdrive, I should say. This little ball here actuates to seal it off or let it go. The little plunger there kind of holds it. Little spring tension guy, and then the cap for all that stuff. Now, unfortunately, I don't have one of those air nozzles with the nice rubber piece on it to keep everything sealed in, so this might not work, but we're going to give it a shot here. I got oil moving, that's for sure. Yep, it's coming out. There we go. Whoa, almost pushed that thing all the way out. Almost lost that guy. All right, so here's that piston with a metal sealing ring, which are just horrible. It's like piston rings. Here's the accumulator. It's got 4 rings on it. So that goes in like this and seals pressure. And there's big, huge springs that I showed you at that first video. They kind of fit inside of there. So that's all of that, how that working's on. There's letting some of that oil that was in that cavity drain. This spring right here, that's the oil plunger. That's part of the oil pump that comes in from back here. That's going to need to come out. And then there's another little ball and valve assembly on the inside that I can get out here. I'm going to bag this stuff up to keep it separate and isolated, and then go in and start taking this stuff out. All right, there's a little brass washer, copper washer in there. So something to keep your eye out for. Just was trying to be careful so as not to mar the aluminum seating surface. All right, so we got all that bagged up. Put that aside. Bag the accumulator up. The other bolt and spring and everything I'd mentioned is in there. That's probably also a 7/16. Same kind of assembly though, with the plunger and the ball and all that kind of stuff. So here you got the spring and the little brass washer, little plunger. And there is a ball in there. There it is. Now that ball is a little bit smaller than the ball that came out of that accumulator stuff, so you want to try to remember to keep them separate, or at least know what's what there. And it's the same sequence of assembly with the plunger and the piston and all that kind of stuff. Before I get to the oil pump, what I'm going to do is take these bolts off and get to those plungers to inspect the O-rings on the plungers, even though I'm going to buy new O-rings anyway. Now these are lock tabs underneath these bolts, and supposedly you can't get them at all. And I'm a big proponent of not reusing lock tabs. So what people have taken to do is going and using nylock nuts instead of lock tabs, which is perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned and equivalent. So we'll go ahead, we'll knock these lock tabs back real quick, get them out of the way, get those bolts off. That'll get those bars out, and then I can get the pistons out. All right, these are 7/16. All right, I think you can see that whole assembly moves in and out. So those springs, the big long springs, the skinny ones I showed you right on these posts here, and that whole guy comes in and out. So when the oil pump is directed and the overdrive is engaged, the pistons that are behind these bars push out on those bars, and that whole thing slides out and compresses those springs and crushes, not crushes, but it uses the clutch and everything that is behind me here that I haven't gotten to yet, and makes that whole thing and locks that overdrive in onto the output shaft. It's pretty ingenious design, but again, I go back to why not just put a 5th gear in there, or even a 6th too. I don't know. I don't know why you would do it that way. All right, so now these plungers here, you should be able to get a pair of pipe pliers and just kind of pull them right out carefully. There's no seating surface or anything in here that's critical on this guy. All right, and those pull right out, and they actually felt pretty good coming out, and these should be a rubber O-ring, and they are. All right, there is some marring on the O-ring, or excuse me, on the piston itself, but nothing that I would consider to be, that would sacrifice the sealing of it. Those O-rings will get replaced, like I said, so we'll get those off real quick because there's no reason to keep them. And these rags are in here just to soak up some of that oil that was in there. So we'll get the O-rings out and then move on. All right, got my handy dandy orange stick here, even though I'm going to be replacing these O-rings. Still a good habit to get into. All right, the O-rings do look in good shape, but they're definitely squared off on the outside. So they've been sitting in there for a while, that's for sure. So they probably would seal, but what are they, $1? There's no reason not to get new ones there. All right, so we'll bag up these pistons and then move on to the oil pump here. Oil pump's in here, you can see, I hope, that there's 2 flathead screws in there and then a larger bolt in the center. Sometimes these flathead screws can be pretty tight, but we're just gonna try a flathead for now and see if I can get them out. Oh, yeah, they come right out. This one does anyway. There's that screw. Yeah, that one came right out too. All right, there's that screw. All right, so now we'll go for that big old bolt in the middle there. That looks like a 9/16, might be a 1/2 inch. Yeah, maybe even a 5/8. 5/8 it is. I don't know how tight this guy's going to be. Don't expect it to be too bad. Doesn't appear to be a washer on that guy. Let me check the drawing. Nope, just a pump end plug it's called, which is what that is. And the 2 screws. All right, so the trick here is you got to try to draw that out, obviously. So you put a plate over top of here, screw that guy in, and then tighten on the plate. And as you draw that, you tend to, as you tighten, you would try to draw that guy out. So let me see if I've got any contraptions here that I can build that will allow me to do that. Made a puller of sorts. So this piece may look familiar. It's that half moon shape that I cut out when I was restoring my differential, which still isn't done yet. So we'll put that there, take a 1/2 inch bolt, screw that down into here until it's nice and tight. And then before that, we'll stick this nut on here and we'll screw that nut all the way up, screw this guy in with that plate here, and then we'll loosen this nut and that will tend to bear on that plate and then hopefully pull the oil pump out. Now the only potential pitfall here is that I need something that the oil pump's going to have to come out further than the face of this to relieve itself or to you know, get out of there. So if that's the case, then I'm going to have to come up with another solution or be able to come up with some way to kind of shim this guy out a little bit. I don't know. But first off, like I said, we'll screw this guy down as far as we can. All right, that should be good. Put the plate down, put this guy in and screw that into the bottom of the oil pump where that plug was. Get that seated and engaged. And now we'll take this guy and we want to loosen it. And what we'll do is as we loosen that, hopefully it'll draw that pump straight out. We'll see if it works. I'm going to get a rationing one. All right, feels like it's coming. Resistance, that initial resistance kind of stopped. So either this thing is going to start to tighten up, which tells me that the oil pump's smacking into this 1/4 inch plate, or it's just going to kind of come completely loose here and the whole thing will kind of pop off. All right, so now that's starting to tighten up, so that tells me that that oil pump is right there. So I may have to shim this guy a little bit. Let's loosen this up. Pull this guy out, which put my wrench away, hold on. All right, so yeah, you can see that oil pump's right there. So what we're gonna have to do here is figure out some way to shim it. I'm gonna grab 2 little, that's coming out easy enough. That the reason that I wanted to cover that whole surface there is because I didn't want to pressure an edge or something like that. Again, this is aluminum. I'm really leery of aluminum and cracking it or breaking it because obviously you can't get this stuff, at least not inexpensively. So I wanted a piece that would completely cover that face so that I didn't put undue pressure on a particular corner or anything. But it's coming out easy enough now that I'm not as nervous about that. So I'm just going to grab some 1/4 inch bar stock and shim it around. Obviously, you just want to make sure that losing it, that 1/4 inch bar stock is not interfere with the oil pump when you put it in there, which is a little hard to see. Gonna hit it again. Oh, there we go. All right, let's see what this looks like. All right, so the oil pump body there, and then the little plunger guy and the spring, and this roller here, that's what rides. There's a cam on the output shaft. This little cam right here rolls, and I think you can see where that center circle is not evenly in the center there. So that lobe, as that comes up, that hits this guy and compresses that. And that little plunger fits down in here and it goes pumpy, 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 and gets you 450 pounds of oil pressure. So that pump is always pumping. It's only when it's ported using all the various plungers and everything like I tried to show you. So that is the oil pump in all its glory. So we'll get that buttoned up, get that put away, save this puller for someday in the future. All right, so next up I think is going to be to get this rear casing off. And if you remember in the first video, I was struggling with the with getting it split apart, and I don't know why that was. One thing also to point out is that what I had called the transition plate isn't really a transition plate. That's the essentially the ring clutch. So that's kind of important. I don't want to mess that up. But we're going to go ahead and hopefully now with some pressure relieved or whatever, I don't know. There was some magic thing that I relieved some pressure or whatever. But we'll see if we can't get this thing cleaned up and split apart. Got all the nuts out, so we'll go ahead and we'll start to try with the same thing I did last time and just knocking around that ring clutch and seeing if I can't get it to play and come apart. And there is no gasket in here. Just to point that out, that you don't want to mess this thing up because you don't have a gasket to seal against. So I'm trying to be careful and only hit on the stuff that sticks out of the gap and not anything that can potentially seal it. Yeah, I think I'm going to get it this time. A little crooked up here. There we go. Voila. So there's that center housing for the most part, almost completely stripped. So I've got the actuator arm that's in there for the solenoid, obviously all the studs. There's a vent up here. I can take that off. I don't even know how big that is. 7/16 it looks like. I'll pop that out real quick. But that's pretty much stripped, and there's not much to that. But like I said, it is aluminum. So we'll set that guy aside. That'll hopefully go and fit in the ultrasonic sink that I got. All right, so underneath here's all my planetary gears and all that kind of stuff. Right here is the sun gear. So that would go in and engage with the planet gears that are in there as that turns. You can see that center part torn in. So we'll get this guy out. So I think now what has to come apart is that ring clutch. Now, I've been calling it ring clutch. I just looked, it's called the brake ring. I think that needs to come out now. So we'll do the same thing where we're going to knock on the opposite side now. Just work our way around. And I think once that comes out, this whole planet gear stuff is going to come out. All right, so there's that guy. And that's kind of beveled. Hence the brake part, as that gets pushed in, makes the brake. And that surface looks really good. No, a little bit of discoloration, but I would imagine that's just due heat, but no pitting or marring or anything like that, so that's good. That's a win. So now I believe this thing will just lift out. Yep. So there's that guy. And then inside of that is my planet gear assembly. And I don't know if that'll come out. Yep, feels like it. All right, so that's a neat piece of machinery right there. And then the inner portion, and that unidirectional clutch is in there. All right, let me take a look around here a little bit. I'll come back and I'll show you what I'm looking at. This is the sliding clutch here, and you can see there's all sorts of good thickness and amount of clutch material there, and they're all pop riveted in. And none of the pop rivets are even close to the surface. So that's a good sign. Everything looks good. Again, no marring or burning or any big scratches or anything like that. So the outer one here interacts with the brake ring like I was telling you about in that way. And the inner one interacts with the annulus. So this annulus and the output shaft are kind of tied together. And that guy would go in here. All right, so right there, I'm not going to take it out because I think it's going to come apart on me and I'm not ready for that to happen yet. But you can see right there and all those little rollers, that's the unidirectional clutch. A couple different pieces there. It's not a regular bearing. So when I turn the annulus and hold the unidirectional clutch, you could see going in that direction, which would be one of the forward directions. I can spin everything. If I try to go the opposite direction, I cannot. That unidirectional clutch grabs and I can't spin it the other way. So that's why you can't engage the overdrive in reverse, because the motor and the transmission will overcome that poor little guy there and shred it. So you don't want that to happen. Got the planetary gears here. They all look good. No floppiness at all in those. And none of the gear teeth look like they're chipped or marred again or anything like that. So I'm real happy with the overall condition of this overdrive, that's for sure. So we're going to go ahead, get this stuff kind of buttoned back up. I don't have any desire to take it apart any further than I already have. I'm going to replace that circlip that I took off. So like I said, I'm pretty happy with the overall shape of this guy. I did find, by accident really, this here is one of the thrust washers that goes right here. There's the bottom half. So you got the bronze one and then you got a steel one. And then there's like a sleeve, a big sleeve in there. So that obviously came out in 3 pieces there. So I checked the thickness of that. I'm not sure if these are variable thicknesses or whatever. So we will have to put that back together. But just kind of button this back up a little bit so that I didn't have stuff all over the place. All right, I was able to go ahead and get these switches out. I just used a pair of Knipex pliers and they were skinny enough to kind of get in there. I did eat up the fiber washers a little bit, but I'd be replacing them anyway. So I think you can see there's a little ball here, and when that ball gets pressed in, that should close that switch. So we know that one works, and we think that the other one worked intermittently. So let's see. So I should have an open now when I press the ball. I should have a short, and I do on this one. And this other guy here, when I do the same thing, I'm getting nothing. All right, and I got good electronic or electrical continuity there, so that tells me that that little detent in there, for whatever reason, doesn't work anymore. So we'll have to get a new one of these, and that'll do that. So again, that's the disassembly of the overdrive unit. I'm not concerned with the gearbox yet, concentrating on the overdrive. So next we'll move into getting the replacement parts and getting all this stuff cleaned up and then getting it reassembled. So thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.